Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities and Miniatures, and it is a Friday, which means we bring to you another obscurity in miniature. And let me be quite frank, this right here is probably one of my all-time favorite comics, and actually one of my very first recollections of a physical comic that I owned. And that is part of the Crossroads epic collection of the Incredible Hulk. This being volume 13, 1984 to 1985. A good 500, almost 500 page chunk of a book that really is my favorite run up to, and sometimes surpassing, the Planet Hulk stuff. Now, let me preface everything by saying, when I was a kid, once upon a time, back in 1984, 85, the Incredible Hulk freaked the crap out of me. It just frightened me. I was scared of the Incredible Hulk. The greenness, not so much. It's just that uncontrollable monster inside him. And I was never like a super angry kid or anything, but just, I can remember the old reruns. I don't even know if it was reruns at that point, but I can remember seeing the TV show on at the time with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, and really getting freaked out every time he would transform, to the point that I would have to go and, change the channel or leave the room or something along those lines. And despite all that, and I got to double check which was the actual issue. It was most likely issue 305, and we'll get to it in a little bit. But this particular set of stories was really cool to me. I'll be honest, as much as the Hulk would freak me out and scare me as a kid, the concept of him and what was usually going on in the comics really bored me. It just didn't do anything for me. I was much more of a fan of, this is the 80s. This is like Chris Claremont era X-Men. That was exciting. New Universe was coming out. That was exciting to me as a kid. Power Pack was out. That was exciting to me as a kid because, I could relate to their ages. Spider-Ham and Star Comics, I was picking up those. I was never a big Spider-Man fan. To this day, certain Hulk stories I love, but I was always more of an Asgardian Kirby-era Thor fan. That's something that's always sat well with me, as you could see from the copious fantasy models that have accumulated on this channel. And I can remember seeing this cover in particular and just wondering what the heck is going on with the Hulk these days. And you have some random Al Williamson inking here, and Al Williamson, I'd later go on to really appreciate for his very Frazetta-esque Alex Raymond inspired Flash Gordon runs, Star Wars. The man he was a monster when it came to those lush tropical space jungles of the 50s and 60s. And I still haven't even talked about how this all started yet. And we're going to get to the book eventually too. So that issue 305 was one of those things where they would have these cheesy, cheap packs of comics, random comics, just, in a baggie, for like 3 for the price of 1 or something. And so issue 305 was one of those such comics, along with X-Men 190, I believe, with Kulan Gath, which was a fantasy-inspired story, which is in a close tie for one of my all-time favorite comics, with his Xavier Scream on the cover that John Romita Jr. drew. That's like one of those things where Professor Xavier and Caliban get fused together into this weird four-armed albino mutant. That fun times. This disturbing comics as a child, they were doing stuff that was really very heady and trippy for me as a youngster at the time. And it's really, I don't know, it probably has had a significant impact in the things that I liked and enjoyed, because those comics freaked me out and I was absolutely glued to them. Kids of the 50s had their Tales from the Crypts and Vault of Horror. I had the Hulk of the Crossroads and the X-Men going fantasy with John Romita Jr. art. So there we are. This book starts off, and one of the nice things is I had never read some of these earlier stories. This actually starts at 297 and goes on for an entire year with the annual in here as well, and the tie-in Alpha Flight issues that wrap up the loose ends of getting Hulk to and from the Crossroads. And I never knew we had a Sinkovich cover here. Kind of interesting to see. I mean, the artwork there on the head makes it quite apparent. But we have a lot of Sal Buscema artwork in here, some Brett Blevins artwork, and Bill Mantlo at the helm in terms of writing. And so you've got a pretty consistent look and feel across the whole thing, which is always nice to see. You know, back in these days, you'd have random artists jumping in and out for fill-in issues all the time, it seemed. But, you know, this beginning part here is a bit of a slog for me. It's just, you know, the Hulk moping around outside, feeling sorry for himself, running around in nature. I remember a lot of that growing up. None of that I cared for. We get into these trippy, weird dream sequences, which are quite appropriate when you find out that, well, none other than Nightmare is playing around with things. How fitting. And I'll be honest, anytime you get the mystical, you know, cosmic, weird side to Marvel, that's where I'll be. Always enjoyed those kinds of books. Kevin Nolan, that's a name that sounds awfully familiar to this cover here. So we have Nightmare, some very Ditko-esque backgrounds, not all that surprising. Throwbacks to the Defenders, and we've got the ongoing story here. Hulk fighting with the cops, blah, blah, blah. Doctor Strange comes to save him and inadvertently causes Banner's psyche to completely regress, disappear entirely from the Hulk, and he just becomes a mindless, rampaging monster. So yeah, fun times, to the point that we have the Black Symbiote Spider-Man coming up to show up along with the Avengers. Old school Captain Marvel. Monica Rambeau, was that her name? I don't remember anymore. And Star Fox of Titan. Oh yeah, that's this one part right here. Daredevil randomly showing up to save children from the rampaging Hulk, because of course nobody can get hurt. Except for the soldiers. I always love that he rips the concrete out of the street, asphalt. Somewhere in here is a part where he tears the pool out of the ground. Anytime Doctor Strange shows up, I better get some trippy visuals. That's just like a guarantee. I need to have that. I mean, we have like everybody guest starring to try and stop the Hulk for one of his typical rampages. Here's the thing, where Star Fox is going to use his powers of pleasure to overwhelm the senses of the Hulk, because any normal creature would be overcome by ecstasy. I don't know what magic powers he's working. I don't remember Star Fox, other than being one of the Titans, the Eternals of Titan, I believe, wasn't it? I know he lived on Titan. And he was somewhat related to Thanos, if I remember correctly. It's been a while. My Marvel lore is not what it used to be. So anyway, they had the big fight, blah, blah, blah. And then we have Doctor Strange hurl the Hulk to the Crossroads. And the Crossroads were a very interesting looking place with all of these various doorways and the signpost that would point you, you know, to anywhere. I don't know if anybody else ever revisited the story of the Crossroads. And so we have the Puffball Collective, which becomes a big thing throughout this run that can't actually enter any of the various realms. And we've got Hulk just ending up in all kinds of crazy situations. He's fighting monsters. He's fighting toy puppets. He's fighting giant herbivore dinosaurs, because that's what a herbivore obviously looks like, right? We've got Hulk in primordial forests with symbiotic spinal cords that look evil, but they actually, well, I'll let you read the story. That was a trippy one. You have what I thought back in remembering when Planet Hulk was first coming out. I thought we were going to get a throwback to this realm. I always remember these stories. Some of these I did end up collecting as a teenager in various floppy forms, but like I said, that issue 305 was probably one of the very first comics floppies, any kind of comic, I remember owning distinctly and holding on to for some time. Let's see, the Puffball Collective, that's a big part of this. So we have this one story here where we have the Hulk, and this is always what led me to believe that when we first saw Planet Hulk, he was headed back to this realm. He's fighting knights on horseback with red-skinned people, and you might remember that the Green Scar worked for the Red King in the Planet Hulk stories. And they have their whole revolution there with the girl who cries flowers. Fun stuff. We've got Hulk in a state of ruin because he can't eat anything because there are all these realms he's going to are full of monsters. And then the UFOs show up, and I thought they were always really jacked up. And the way they get clowned in this, I always can remember just the weirdness. Like, these three scenes right here are from various realms that the Hulk had already visited. I never knew that. In fact, this was one of his friends. I thought that was kind of jacked up. It's an interesting story. And that's the thing with these was, you know, almost every issue is its own self-contained thing, which I learned later on. And going through this chronologically, it's kind of nice to see everything making more sense. The UFOs, I don't remember a whole lot about. I knew they were an older Hulk villain, but they've got them, like, traveling through time. I always love this here where Hulk ends up swallowing vapor and then breathes her out as fire and gets Ironclad all nice and molten. So eventually, with the help of the Puffball Collective, Hulk ends up sending off the UFOs to various dimensions. Like, Vapor gets sucked off to a planet with no atmosphere, and X-Ray gets stuck fighting monsters that are immune to his radiation. Ironclad is too heavy and sinks into the quicksand. That's the one that I've always remembered. You know, it doesn't matter if I've looked at this, you know, for the last few days, reminiscing and thinking about this video, getting ready for it. That series of images has always sat with me. Or Vector being stuck on the planet where the winds are so strong he has no control over any of his telekinetic powers. He's spending all his time just trying to stay safe. Good times. Now, this was an interesting one, and again, having read all these old floppies, I don't know where they are anymore. This big guy, Klaatu, it should be Klaatu because it's Klaatu Verada reference here, was actually from an earlier Hulk issue. It's 136, and I mean, I didn't know that, and it didn't dawn on me, and just rereading this again drudged up those memories, and a quick trip to Wikipedia confirms that, yeah. And what's funny is Sal Buscema actually did all these illustrations, but was one of the original inkers for the issues these first showed up almost, 120, like 200, almost 200 issues earlier, quite a few years prior to that. Where we've got all kinds of craziness, like the captain is now part of the ship's central computing system and is literally the figurehead, both in name and form, of the ship. Got fun alien stories. We've got some fun demon stories coming up. And at some point, I want to say, I don't remember which stories, Al Williamson started doing the inking in there. And then we get into the Guardians. Goblin, Guardian, and Glow. Glow is the little thing that always reminded me of the bit or whatever from Tron. And again, just crazy locales. And there's parts where, like, one panel is in a different world, and, you know, I really enjoyed that stuff. Here we go. Here's where we get the Al Williamson inking. As an adult, this stuff gives it away. The luscious, detailed backgrounds. The tropical jungles that look like Frank Frazetta drawings. A hallmark of his work. Frazetta-ish looking skeleton riders. I mean, hell, the inking alone is quite obvious what he was doing here. Full-on Frazetta-ish scenes. And then one of the things I haven't even mentioned is we've got Mike Mignola actually doing a lot, and I mean a lot, of the covers. And this is like 1984 still, 1985 at this point. You know, you can see a lot of the early beginnings of what he would soon, really start experimenting with and end up doing. And he actually did a couple of these issues in here, like this one right here. I know he'd done his, Fawford and Grey Mouser, I think, by this point. We have kind of crazy time traveling and recollections of the Hulk and Banner. And then, of all things, we've got the Beyonder showing up in his popped collar and rolled up sleeves and all. So that would have been like, Secret Wars 2, wasn't it? And eventually we do have the Hulk make his way back into the modern world, out of the Crossroads. And at that point, I just stopped caring until much later, looking at like the Joe Fixit issues that Todd McFarlane would draw. And, when we got to the Professor version of the Hulk, I know my younger brother was subscribing to it at the time. A lot of these I ended up reading, or purchasing on my own, but my cousin, whose dad just passed away actually, my cousin was a hardcore, and I do not use that term lightly, hardcore collector of Marvel Comics back in the 80s, to the point that one of the rooms in their place was, I kid you not, floor-to-ceiling comic books. And I know that they had comics in storage places elsewhere, but I mean, we spent a good week and a half at that house once, and I can remember just every day was something new discovering on those shelves. I mean, he did read some other stuff. He had like some ElfQuest, DC, but he had such an impressive Marvel collection, and I can remember spending time talking with him about these stories. He liked it, but he was much more of a fan of the rampaging Hulk, running from the law, not so much the fantasy stuff. That was way more my thing. So, good memories with my cousin growing up, talking about these. I can remember him whipping out the original appearance of Wolverine, just in floppy form, just tossing it to me. Here, take a look at this guy, Wolverine. I'm not sure if we'd even seen. That was around the time of the Mutant Massacre stuff, I think. I can remember seeing like the Weapon X stories. That might have been later. And we had the Barry Windsor Smith. Maybe he drew some of the X-Men at the time. Anyway, I'm just reminiscing about my cousin's collection, which was incredibly impressive, even back then, by comic collecting standards. But honestly and truly, I think if you're a fan of the fish out of water type stories for these kinds of characters, I love when we have characters in situations, locales that they're not really supposed to be in. And that was one of the cool things about this book. And it's pretty interesting for even its time. Things are happening around the Hulk that I don't know if we'd really see so much in the more mainstream, more normal stories of that time. I guess because it's more of a fantasy bend, they can get away with more. I don't know. But I mean, just the visuals of the book, just the weirdness of what's going on. Like the fake buildings falling down, monsters everywhere, interesting locations, weird things happening to the Hulk, Ditko-esque backgrounds, weird alien civilizations and peoples everywhere. I mean, yeah, there's a bit of a superhero slugfest here and there. There's a lot going on. Scottish vampires, for lack of a better term. I don't think you can go wrong with this if you want something different for the Hulk. I don't know, between this and Planet Hulk, I don't know, maybe I'd have to give the edge to Planet Hulk just because it's a bit more modern. I really liked that run too. But if you want more classic comics with a more traditional color palette and not all of the, high-tech blast processing that we see with modern stuff, this would get my recommendation, hands down. Hopefully someday I will be able to track down that X-Men 190 in collected form. I'd love to see it with all of the original color to it, rather than the faded, washed-out newsprint that was just smudged and rubbed to hell and back by my, curious little fingers back in the day. So do take a look if you want something different, I think, with this book. There's some interesting stuff to be had here. So with that said, this has been High Lord Tamberlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and we will see you back here soon. Bye-bye.